Good morning. This is MSP Community Live, where we cover all this information and conversations and topics going on in your online communities. And today, this is not Matt Topper with me. I think you're this way.
Yeah,
You're not Matt Topper. This is the infamous Tom Lawrence. How you doing, my friend?
infamous. That's good word.
I figure with the shenanigans that you, me, Slagle, and our group
Yeah,
puts on it, infamous is probably about right. When we get to IT Nation Secure and they have Jason Slagle badges ready for him, like multiple, yeah, infamous is the right word. How you
yeah.
doing?
Gotta have fun with the shenanigans.
Yeah, why not? And I'm going a little retro. I know you're a fan of your shirts. I'm wearing my very first IT Nation MSP GeekCon tech bar. I think we did it at Connect, thanks to McGee in 2022, and we've been doing it
Nice.
every Secure and Connect since.
I
Yeah.
I forgot to put one of my shirts on, so I have my Mario shirt on. I'm going
One of my
between.
favorite
I'm
shirts of
outside
yours.
smoking right now with a big old pork butt. So I went out there and checked it, and I was
uh,
like, I didn't want my shirt smelled like smoke. So, but I'm fine with the Mario shirt smelling like smoke.
I mean, yeah, it's Mario. It's Yossi eating, so
Yeah,
meat makes sense.
yeah.
And so, for those that don't know, I mean, we know Kevin Dukevich, our friend, is the meat master supreme of
He
the
is.
MSP space. But I did not know you are a fellow meat smoker. What do you got going on?
Oh man, I definitely I go old school. I like to use nothing but charcoal, real wood, lump charcoal, and then there's no like auto loader pellet, no Bluetooth, man. I just go up there and
Okay.
literally check it about every hour or two, make sure the temperature's good and adjust as needed. So
Well,
you
that's what I
gotta,
was going to ask.
there's a joy I take in that. I actually sit out there with my laptop, smell the smoke, and send my emails.
It's funny because there's the number of MSPs that have offline hobbies is a significant number. Our friend BJ Pote and Dustin Bolander. Dustin does chickens, BJ Pote does avocados and farming. It's like the number of us that just disconnect in our hobbies
Yes,
is awesome, like you
exactly.
with your bike riding, right? Like the
Yep.
you know so
All that
we're
stuff.
here to talk about tech news. I think we should, or MSP community news, but I think we should bring up, you've been doing MSP Dispatch. I'm the regular
Yeah.
host of the recorded shows, and you've been doing the every other week live shows. How's that going for you?
Loving the live shows. They're just fun to me because I get to burn through like 20 stories in half an hour, and that's fun. like I,
Yeah, it's basically
it's
what
an
you do on your
outlet
other
because
stuff,
I
just
obsessively
stories.
collect all these stories, so I got to put them somewhere besides my head. I mean, something I tweet them out a lot too. So if you
Yeah,
followed me on Twitter, but I only have this many characters. I can
yeah, you need
spew
some space
barf out a
to.
lot more characters when I'm doing a
Yeah,
live stream.
exactly, exactly. Well, today's no different. We're gonna go a little different since we don't have Matt Topper in. And hey, what's up, Dean? I have a fancy ass Wi-Fi grill. The Wi-Fi valve finally died. I had to reconnect the pipes just by a boring grill. I was gonna ask you. Kevin Dukevich is like, he did a session at GeekCon, like how he uses Home Assistant to monitor his meets and
Yep,
the controls and all that stuff. Um, you don't do any of that. You're like completely like offline.
completely old school, man. I don't want any electronics near my meat.
That's and with
Take
that, we
how
should
you
probably
will.
move on to the first community topic. All right. So the first one we have is, we're gonna go a little technical here. We're gonna go something you've never, ever, 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 ever talked about on your channel at all. So we have here, Danny can bring up, we have VMware VM solution from Steve7647 says, what does everyone recommend for VM solution with VMware out of the game? And for those that don't know, MSP Dispatch, we covered the Broadcom acquisition and their subsequent butchering of the partner program. VMware out of the game. Citrix announcing they dropped Zen Center. I need a new solution for VMware host, or VM host, sorry. On premises only, usually 2 hosts with 6 VM servers running web servers, backup domains. Prefer for the ability, load balancing if possible, are the biggest things being able to pay for support when needed. So I'm going to go ahead and guess your first answer is not going to be Hyper-V.
No, no, I don't think anyone's first answer should be Hyper-V.
Somewhere Kelvin is screaming right now. All right, my friend. For those that haven't seen, you have to have more than like 24 videos on XP's.
Yeah. I've got an entire playlist tutorial.
Yeah.
I'm a part of the official documentation for XCP. So I'm friends with
It's
the
funny
people
how
that
we
keep
those are
on,
the time.
so
Forget the words, forget the recognition, the accolades. Like the thing I'm most proud of is that my tutorial on how to install Hoodoo on DigitalOcean, that's in their documentation.
Nice.
Like back in the day, my first lab tech deployment script for Huntress was what they used for like the first 3 years. So it's like that. Those bragging rights, that's far more important than any awards we get. So you're on the documentation. You like, say it again. What's the platform you like?
XCPNG. It's based on Zen Server. It is a fork of what Citrix was doing. Oh, not really a fork. Citrix was maintaining the open source one poorly, and that was a Citrix
Okay.
Zen Server that was mentioned in the post there. But the poor handling of things by Citrix, no one's shocked by any of that. They're their own worst enemy. Have
Mhm.
led to a fork that happened in 2017, and it has grown dramatically. The team at Vates is the one behind XCPNG and Zen Orchestra. It is a good replacement, and we've been using it since
Mm.
2018 or 2019. I started moving people off of Citrix, so my consulting on it doesn't start with like this VMware incident that just rapidly accelerated how many people are moving away from it. It put it into full overdrive. It was already going quite well. We'd moved thousands of virtual machines off of VMware, but they've also created nice import tools to make that easy. The reasons why, though, is I see people suggesting Proxmox. I think Proxmox is a pretty amazing open source project. I don't have any
It's funny. That
poking.
was your first video, 20 or XPNG, not your first video. First video that came up for me, XPNG versus Proxmox 2022 and why I chose.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
Definitely got a lot of discussion. And I don't throw any shade at Proxmox, but from an MSP standpoint, it's XCPG is open source, but there's
Mhm.
difference in maturity levels of open source projects or even how they're run. There's plenty of open source projects that you may not want to use because, well, do they have a support package? Do they have a service level agreement? Do they have a reseller program?
Mm.
And those are all features of XCPNG that are very clear as having all of those very traditional things that we're used to, partner programs in there. And we've actually worked with the Vate team to enhance, and they keep enhancing the offering. They're listening to the community like, hey, what would make this a better reseller program? And they're
Mhm.
very engaged to do so. It kind of gives you an overall good feeling that both products, as I said, are good products, but as the MSP space is not necessarily Linux leaning, that becomes part of a problem. I mean, Proxmox easy to support if you're a Linux guru, no problem. And I have no problem supporting it. The reality is, I don't even have a big team of Linux nerds working for us because if you're in the MSP space, you fix Windows all day. You get really good at Azure AD and heating printers. So
I mean, but to be fair, you also now have a little bit of a Linux and automation powerhouse under your
we got
house.
Jason
Like,
Slagle too.
yeah, 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 but your point holds true. You and I are probably a lot more comfortable in Linux environments
Yeah.
than
Then the
most of
average
the
tech is.
MSPs. Yeah,
Well, and that's kind of our joke. We can't just have things that Tom and Jason can support. Those are conversations we have in our meetings. Like, this
yeah.
looks fun, but then only Tom and Jason can do it. So, okay, we're gonna
And
make
to the
something more.
MSPs that watch this and are like, "Why?" It's because we learned this. It's the same thing I had with the CC the Cisco voice stuff. It got to be the point where I was the only one in the company that knew how to manage this stuff, which is a bad idea.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I'm with you 100%. Pick something scalable. So if you had to distill down to like one or two items that you like XPCNG the most for, what is XCPNG? Sorry, I keep butchering it. What are like the top three things? Are like this is why I choose this versus everything else.
Now, I really like the backup system. The integration of having a native backup as part of it, written by the same company, means really smooth integration for that. Being open source allows you to, if you don't want to license it, it doesn't turn into a pumpkin at midnight. If the licenses expire, they are support contracts with SLA agreements and guarantees.
Which is
But if you
what
don't pay
the
them,
original poster asked for. He wanted to make sure there was commercial support, which is important
yeah,
for these packages, right? Or these
yeah.
platforms.
And you run into nuance where maybe you want to test it out thoroughly and use it yourself. And maybe you want to license you have a whole extra server as a spare, but you don't really turn it on that often. So you don't want to license it. Go ahead and load it. You don't have to have a license. You just won't get support for that server. It's not on anyways.
Absolutely. No, and it's and so that seems to be like, I don't know about you, but when I see the posts on Reddit that say on RMSP or sysadmin or any of the others that say I'm looking for an open source solution, it almost always means I'm looking for a free solution. Um,
Right.
and open source sometimes can be just as costly, if not more costly. I'll use Ubuntu. We use Ubuntu across our the majority of our platform for the stuff that's not microservices, and we pay, we pay Canonical for support. I mean, it's not that we don't have the resources in house. It's just you wouldn't have a server out of warranty. You
It's
wouldn't
nice
have.
to have someone to backstop you. And
Yes. Yeah.
when IBM purchased Red Hat, I mean, they didn't give $31 billion for a company that just gives code away. It's
Right.
the support
Well,
contracts they have.
and so, okay, you're the open source guy, right? Like you're the guy I go to and says, okay, who are the, and not always free, but who are the FOSS or the open source stuff? Um, why do you think it is? Microsoft did the same thing, right? They're giving a lot away. They opened up VBNet. They opened up whatchamacallit, PowerShell, obviously. They bought GitHub. Um, all these people are now kind of Windows, giving away Windows 8, Windows 10, or Windows 10, Windows 11. Why do you think they're moving to open source? This has been your life that's why I'm asking you. You've been using open source
Oh,
forever, and now we have companies that are literally saying, we're going to give this stuff for free. Visual Studio Code. You and I are back from the days of TechNet and MSDN, where Visual Studio costs, it was what, 3-4 grand if if you ever had to pay for it.
yeah.
Yeah. And now you get Visual Studio Code, which is, in my opinion, a better IDE for most things. So why do you think they're doing this? Why are they giving all this stuff away now?
So it actually starts a number of years ago. So Steve Ballmer, well known for calling open source the cancer, Linux the cancer, et cetera, dancing around on stage like a moron. One of the last actions he did to set up Satya Nadella as he passed the baton was he approved open sourcing quite a few things in there. We actually covered this in episode 256 of the Sunday Morning Linux Review back when I was doing it. There's a reason I remember it. The Microsoft, we were at Build, and the people who actually were involved in bringing open source to it, the handler left and they said, we're securing our jobs. And now that someone isn't here to tell us what we're not allowed to say, would you like a great episode? So, and I said, cool. And they actually asked, because they asked what episode number it's going to be. And I said, I can make it whatever. We're in the 250s right now. And he goes, release this on 256 so you remember it. So it's stuck in my head. And this is from 2017.
And I was wondering, like, damn, that's impressive for the number of videos you have to remember an episode number. And that makes sense. Yeah, 250. I love that.
I might rip that apart because, we don't really do that Sunday Morning Linux Review. Was the thing we did for years with a group of my friends, and things fell apart after a while. But we did it for like 10 years almost. But that particular episode, I might take a lot of excerpts out of it and kind of do a new video about it, because there's a lot of interesting things behind the scenes what happened at Microsoft. Among the funnier things that you'll get a kick out of is the Microsoft legal department having a panic attack when they found out how much swear words were in code in the comment, and realizing when you released the code, they said, we have to do a sanitize. So there's actually a pull request on a bunch of the stuff that was to remove swear words.
That is phenomenal. Yeah, like I love that because, like, we get, obviously, you and I see code all pretty often, and we have the benefit of seeing some code that's not regularly meant for the daylight. And programmers get wild in some of the code. I love it. It's no different than MSPs talking trash sometimes, venting about their clients. Absolutely no different.
Yeah, and Kevin last it's at the same conference. I did an interview with Jeffrey Snover, inventor of PowerShell, and pretty interesting guy. He was fun to hang out with. One of the things that he had said, and we were talking about open source, and there's actually a video I have of this because it was all recorded there. I was up on stage, but he was really leaning into. I said, well, you've always worked with your clients and things like that. Microsoft's customers, essentially the developers. And I said, how is it like working with them now that they have access to some of the code for things? And he says, it's been really enlightening because no one really thought about what would happen. We always like the suggestions from our customers, but what if they could actually suggest the code changes? What if they could be involved at a deeper level? We never expected the level of interaction that we have. So this is all the way, like I said, 2017. This is when they did the WSL. That was part of what I was there to cover. So as they were bringing all that in, they brought some open source people in, and it just kind of hit them in the head of how well they took a risk on it. It went better than well for them. And they said, oh crap, Ballmer's retiring, so we can just pretend it's Satya Nadella's idea, but Ballmer signed off on it, is what I learned on Inside. But never
it's 2016, right? Satya didn't come until like 2018,
2017 is right when Nadella came in. So it was it was one of those things. He set him up, and Nadella, of course, said, we're going to meet customers where they are. That was what his famous incoming speech was, which meant, hey, we're going to stick it in the cloud and bill you for it. But whatever, they're making a lot of money.
But whatever, but it's where you are. And then we're going to add Xbox services to Azure because that makes sense. you know, but no, and PowerShell's, you're absolutely right though. PowerShell is absolutely, I'll call it a language. I know it's a little more than a
Yeah.
language at this point. Um, but Microsoft, I think, officially refers to it as a platform. But that is a powerhouse offering of Microsoft, just like VS Code. These are not things they would
No,
normally
and
open source and
and
give away the
Snowbird's
code
a big
to.
open source guy.
Yeah.
That's why PowerShell's open source, and that's also why he, I guess I could say this publicly. He was just, let's say, not at the management retreat with Ballmer because of his love of open source, but he was friends with Nadella.
Well, that's fine. That I'll take Nadella over. I can see that. I'll take Nadella over Balmer any day
Yeah.
of the week. All right, so that's enough on that. We have our next story. We're going to take advantage. Most of you in the audience know Matt Topper works for ConnectWise, so we generally avoid ConnectWise stories or any of the competitive stories. But we don't have such restrictions today. So Kaseya versus ConnectWise, and we'll just off the top, we're not going to bash anybody. Our MSP takes care of that more than enough. So we have Mitchell Toss says our company uses ConnectWise PSA Kaseya for IT glue and another vendor for RMM. We have been discussing integration purposes, the future possibility of switching to Kaseya for PSA to make integration between ticketing and KB. I wonder if he's talking about what is it, BMS or Autotask. My account rep for a few years now assures me that their migration process is amazing. Of course, that's her job, and that they have ConnectWise clients switch to them all the time. That's typical sales stuff. How about other people's experience with ConnectWise versus Kaseya? I'm sure that some of you will say scrap both of them. So if you're one of those people, please tell me what's a better PSA and KB substitute. Initial thoughts. Let's skip the Kaseya and ConnectWise billing woes and contractual woes and whatever, because whatever. Let's just do it on the merits of the platform, because I don't think I've never been a Kaseya customer. I was pre-IT Glue, pre-purchase. I have been a ConnectWise customer for over a decade, but every vendor sucks when it comes to billing and contracts, so that's not
Yeah.
unique. So what do you think, man? What do you say when you hear this?
It's tough because you need someone who spent time with it. And unfortunately, I've never been, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on your perspective, I've never been a Kaseya customer either. So it's really hard. And there was a lot of posts around this because until you really rubber meets the road, use this at scale. This is a
Yeah,
challenge we have at CNWR. Like, could we switch? Do we like another one better than what we have?
and you
Maybe
guys are still
everything looks,
managed, right? You guys are
yeah,
full
we're still on
manage
manage.
automate. Yeah.
But it's one of those things the absolutely crazy task of moving it is hard. And I do have friends that have MSPs that are using a Kaseya. They're making money. They're profitable. They're big companies. They've figured out a way to make it work for them. And they have the same chaos problems we have. So
Always.
uh, it's leadership meeting was just before this, so we
Mhm.
the usual scratching head issues of what's this in our ICP and all those things. Those are
Mhm.
mostly what we spend our day talking about, not whether or not manage has something.
Right.
Although we did look at the revenue numbers, they looked down, but we realized it was a billing cycle mismatch and something. But those little
There's
issues
always
type of things
something.
happen. I
Yeah.
think that happened whether we had manage or we had another PSA
Well,
platform.
to the point, I just had a $60,000 billing dispute with one of my vendors, and it was not an MSP vendor; it was another vendor, platform or infrastructure vendor for us. Um, it's just, and it took 2 months to correct. It was a billing error on their part. It just happens with all the vendors. So,
Yeah.
well, I know it's frustrating when people go through it. I don't put a lot of stock in it. And yes, vendors could handle it a lot better than they do many times, zero question. I just don't think like that's never been one of my qualifiers, honestly, because we have to do billing audits anyway every year. We always make sure there's no revenue leakage, no expense leakage. That's just general part of doing business. So yeah, I don't hold a lot of stock in that. So okay, but you have looked at moving. You've heard of other MSPs that have moved, and are they ever happy they did?
Sometimes there's other ones that like Halo's pretty well liked because it's
Yeah.
the newest one, but there's a big advantage to being the newest one. All these other ones are built on really old legacy code, and no one wants to do the heavy lift of refactoring the code. This is sometimes the reason a new product comes out, especially in the
Mm,
security space, when you have to build giant data lakes. Well, if you built your data lake on technology from 2017 or you built it on technology from 2022, you're going to
yeah.
choose different foundational setups. And the way you index that data, the speed at which you can index that data with modern code or modern languages, or if it was built just with more modern modular frameworks. We're watching all these older projects, and I was, we'll just go completely off topic, but related to the industry here. I was
Mhm.
poking at Fortinet over some dumb problems that are baked into their old legacy code because they don't
Which
really
one of their
root
last
back.
200 CVEs over the last 3 weeks? I mean,
Yeah.
it's a running meme at this point.
It is. And the latest one was Mary had a little, and it stops there, but it's part of Mary had a little lamb was a hard
Yeah.
coded credential in Fortinet. And I just published that because someone just dropped the research because the patch just came out. It was like,
Come
it was
on.
from 2019 is when that was baked in there. And
Yeah.
it's just like, I can't believe
But
that's
who
5
makes
years
that
ago
design
now.
decision, right? Like, how does that even like in 2019, it wasn't okay to hard code credentials. You can't
No,
even
it was
say it
not.
was okay then. You know what I mean?
But coming back to these legacy code bases, they're going to be a little bit more difficult to work with. So the new ones may have some more things. They may be like, we're going to build it with a framework that supports an API first before we
Right.
even have the whole product out, like it was on the roadmap, versus the bolting on of the APIs that we see with the
Yeah.
older products of, yeah, we can probably make that work. Hey, who can write an interpreter to turn our VB
Yeah.
code into an API?
When I look at companies for potential investment, the first question I ask if they're a software vendor, microservices or monolithic, because and it's not an immediate disqualifier for me, but I chose this even back when I was an MSP. I chose this in my later MSP years. I was only going to use web-based services. Um, and don't get me wrong, I love manage. I did use BMS. 2014, 2015, Fred Vicola had invited me to try BMS and VSA, and I did so for like a month, in tandem with Manage and PSA, or Manage and Automate. And this is 10 years old, 8 years old. Take it for what it is. It's not current information. Um, I found VSA and LabTech to be at parity, honestly. One uses Java-based code editor that's very strict. The other one uses, it almost looks like Flash. I think it is also Java. Um, but they're both shit. But they're
Yeah.
very capable, very, very capable, unless you actually know how to code, and then it's very, very miserable. But they were capable. BMS, the bowel movement, that's a whole other conversation. I would never go to BMS over Manage. Autotask, yeah, in a heartbeat. And I will give Autotask it's fully cloud based. It's not a bunch of VMs. Um, Same reason I'd look at Halo or Ninja for RMM for the exact same reasons. It's web based. Nothing against Manage and Automate. I think they're incredibly capable platforms. I'm on Salesforce, and there's a lot of things I miss about Manage. Um, I will tell you, every time you change PSAs, it's an awesome opportunity to look at your business operations and kind of forget what you were doing, look at what you want to do. Because most PSAs allow you to build out, whatever you want to do.
Yeah, and you got to make sure that you're not restricting yourself for certain revenue opportunities or methods of doing business because your PSA can't do it. So, this is where things like RPI Roost
Mm.
comes in, and
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, so let's talk documentation, because that's something you and I feel very, very, very passionately about.
yes,
Um, I chose Hoodoo. I was an IT Glue user. I used Confluence before that. I used Confluence in tandem with IT Glue because IT Glue at the time didn't have any good hierarchy for document presentation for clients, so it wasn't easily searchable. You had to share links. I don't know if that's been corrected today. It's not relevant, but I use Hoodoo. I've used Hoodoo for a few years. Very happy with it. Um, Very fast. It's in a Docker container, super portable, super easy to back up, super easy to manage, and I can move it anywhere. So I like that. I know a lot of us have moved to Hoodoo. You're more on the open source side of things. Surprise, surprise. What's your preferred documentation platform?
it was hard to maintain in some ways, but easy in others. Is I really liked using MediaWiki for
Okay.
documentation. There's a
Yeah.
lot of extensibility into it. If you're wondering how well it scales, insert Wikipedia. I might have heard of it. So, same software. The
Yeah.
Wikimedia Foundation is who supports that software. And if you want to know who else uses it, NASA uses it. That's how they document the internal processes and procedures in them. They build everything in wikis, so it literally has all the rocket data in there and reports and things like that. The challenge is getting people more forced into using it to build structure. It can work. Obviously, public facing successes like Wikipedia can show that.
Mhm.
Internal success that you can find from the NASA people and what they've done and customized it. There's also a lot of plugins to make it more extensible. It's just a framework that you can layer a few things on top of. But ultimately, when we merge with CNWR, they have everything integrated with Hoodoo because of the plugins and things like that. So from a pure documentation, I like things like easy to manage document systems. As a matter of fact, because 20 years ago when I worked in corporate, I was ISO 9001 and everything else
Oh,
with the
wow.
IT department. So I've been doing this for having to have good, clear procedures, process, documentation, audit levels, checkouts, and revision dates on documents. It's been 20 years of my life. So I like that. I love the automated history that these new tools can do. And I was using similar tools all the way back then. There was this, I can't remember the name of it, but it was a really early open source project I worked with the developers on to implement in the early 2000s. But
We got
yeah,
a
we settled on Hoodoo because there's an
yeah.
ease of use. And of course, the plugins where you have certain things building your documentation automatically. You're not going to get that same level of integration if you're going to use the Lion Guard or
Well,
Insert
you
Name or
gotta
whatever
build it.
automation
That's
tool.
the problem, right? You
Yep.
with Hoodoo and IT Glue, both of them equal. And what is it? Passportal. There's other documentation platforms,
Yeah.
but the point of having MSP centric platforms is they integrate out of the box with other MSP platform tools. Um, that is something that I didn't account for when I moved to Salesforce of like all my MSP tools that I loved. Now I'm like, okay, I got to get analogs for this stuff, right? Like there's no break gauge for Salesforce. Like that didn't exist. Well, it did. It was a really shitty integration. But you get what I'm saying, Lo. Like there's no automated integration for Salesforce. That didn't exist. So yeah, having to write that stuff, which is like you said, where the benefit comes out of having stuff pre-integrated, or you get RPA tools like Roost or Pia, or use one of the open source, use 8N8 or Zapier or Tray.io or whatever the hell you want to use. Doesn't matter. But it's easier when it's pre-built. The other thing, so it's funny that you mentioned NASA and Wikipedia obviously use these because you get the similar hate for WordPress, and yes, WordPress can be extremely insecure, but also insanely large companies also use it. It's just a matter of it's not the tool you use; it's how you implement it. Speaking of another, I think bears honorable mention. I don't use it personally, but Cyberdrain, Kelvin and Ashley are the ones that turned me onto this. They use Gitbook for the Cyberdrain, the SIP documentation portal.
Oh yeah.
I think they do an amazing job of it. Um, we're evaluating it, looking for our stuff. Whatchamacallit, Dean brought up, we use our VoIP docs. We built our own documentation platform. We chose to make it public facing. Obviously, it has some private stuff too. We use it based on Help Juice. I'm not a fan of the platform, but it does what it does. It doesn't matter. It's just have your plan because, like you said, there's no way NASA or Wikipedia could have done this with any of the tools if they didn't have documentation team. Well, they had teams, but doing the planning and planning for once you create documentation, you got to think for how you're going to keep it up to date. How often are you
Yep.
going to audit it? How often are you going to revise it? Who's going to be in charge of it? Are you going to use graphics? Or screenshots? Are you going to use video? Are you going to use both? Are you going to link to the original resources or have copies of your own stuff? There's a lot of design considerations. Yeah, they equals Ashley. Yeah, let's be honest. Anything Kelvin takes credit for is Ashley. Which we call it. But you have to account for all these things before starting any documentation platform. Did you have experience of this? What are the things that like the gotchas that you've come across when looking at documentation?
Understanding and having a common structure, especially if you're going to create a lot of tutorials like I do, making sure you have easy ways you can do some of the markdown. Maybe, and this is something that doesn't get considered, but you'll see it in good documentation, especially when you're talking Linux code or PowerShell for that matter as well.
Yeah,
Is make sure it's got the proper plugins so you can just easy copy paste code. Just let people copy and paste commands. It'll make their life easier, make your life easier. Support tickets go down. It
it
don't
drives
work.
me nuts when I seen screenshots of commands. Like,
Yes.
come on, dude. Like, or when people send you screenshots of serial numbers, like, just save me a
Yeah.
little bit of headache, you know?
Save me a little. And it's that little stuff on there because if you look at, back to CPNG, look at the
Yep.
documentation. There's copy and paste code in there you can do easily, and it's maintainable. And then especially if you're maintaining a larger project, make sure you know who those champions are who keep that documentation up to date.
Mhm.
because it can be a lot of little things when you think about changing something. And I'll use PF Sense as an example. They do one hell of a job because they let you choose the old revisions if you'd like, in case you're on an older version. But
I
when you
love
update
that.
to a new
Yeah.
version, there are slight things they change. Like, hey, we updated how we label the WAN interface when you're binding something to it. Oh, that occurs 37 times in the documentation. So we're going to have to search and replace that for the latest revision. So that's where it kind of gets to be a little bit hairy to update all that. And all your RMMs, the same thing. Like, they have documentation, and you want to be able to update every time you do a revision change. Like, hey, we fixed that feature, or we added something new to the UI. There's a lot of screenshots got to be updated to reflect that.
Well, and
That
that's one
becomes
of
a
those
kind of a
things
hairy thing to manage.
yeah, no, 100%. That was one of those things that when we revised our processes, because being small, we get to break fast and iterate quickly. Um, but that was one of the things we had to revise. Where, like, as we grew, it was like I had to tell the team we don't do any releases anymore before the documentation is done. We don't do Managers are not they're instructed not to give their employees new instructions until the documentation's been updated, because we manage and discipline and coach off the documentation. So if the documentation is wrong, you can't hold the employee accountable to something you said. That's the whole reason for having documentation. But that takes a lot. That takes a huge that takes a huge effort, like team round, because there's times where you're like, no, we just updated this plugin for Automate and we really want to start using it. Or we just added this integration in Manage for Hoodoo or for Gitbook, and you really want to start using it right away. And it's like, no, documentation first.
Well,
You know what I mean?
and things are getting worse, so to speak. And we're not sure how we're going to handle this in the future, other than create more of it. Because
Yeah.
the only answer to this, we are now creating video documentation for things, and we're updating it to an LMS and referring it.
Yeah.
So it can still be flagged in the LMS as like, hey, this is outdated. And I even have embedded some of my videos in some of our documentation.
Yeah.
Because I've got tutorials on a lot of things. But then again, they have to be audited because these work for this version of that software. If the version changes, and that version change means the process change, well, we have to denote that in the video until a new video exists. And it's
Yeah.
even more work now to recreate a tutorial to reflect the different menu items that have changed in a video.
It's a full-time job. Starting last year, we hired a full-time documentation manager. So the way to not overwhelm them, everybody in the staff is charged with doing documentation. I like to do it using your underlings. You teach them how to do it, have them document what you did, have them create the documentation. Sometimes when you write it down, it makes you remember better. And then we use like Wizard Shot or something like that to document the steps, shoot it over to, we call it Solutions Hub. But then the Solutions Hub is the one that makes sure it's to our standards, and takes that burden off the individual staff members. Because if, like you said, you want your tutorial videos to follow a similar format, and it's because the user or the viewer that's watching it or reading it or consuming it anyway, they're expecting certain things after they're used to your delivery style. And if you change that up, you're going to kind of screw with them a little bit. They're going to not be as attentive to what you're saying.
Yeah, I was actually just helping them design a common thumbnail template for all the videos we're uploading in there. So even though they're internal, because they're like, can we use
Yeah.
your thumbnail template? I said, mine are to get clicks. Let's just make them
Not the
simple.
same thing.
Yeah, not the same thing. I mean, we want to make them readable, so when they're small.
Right.
So I sent a template over to Matt, and I was like,
Nice. Whatchamacallit. So you mentioned LMS, and it's right in the line with documentation. I don't know any MSPs that are doing an LMS. You want to talk us a little bit like what your decision was to start doing that and what you evaluated, what you ended up with?
a little bit of evaluation, very little. I won't lie. The reason we ended up with Empath is because we like Wes Spencer and those guys. So I'll be
Yeah,
honest.
that's easy. Okay. Yeah,
Really easy.
that's we all
Um,
love Wes and Kyle and Alex. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
they actually have an interesting idea, and it's not a pitch for them. I've got no financial interest yet. Maybe if they do well, I'll get in on this. But
Yeah.
anyways, their whole Empath thing, it's not just that they have a bunch of training materials in there. They also have the ability for you to upload your own. I'm like, oh, so for the price, if you were to buy an LMS or pay for a subscription to one, it's not much of a different price. They already have a lot of content, and they let us upload our own. And we're trying to do more concise training a lot of our staff and go through, did you follow this? Did you watch this tutorial on this? How it explains how to set up XCP-ng, not just how to set it up, our process for what you load, what
Right.
steps you're going to go through. So we have a common configuration that is used, and here's the videos that walk you through that. So those are really important. And You can do a lot in a video because I can walk through the actual what the product look like. Here's the steps. Next, yes, click here, check that box. It's I think a little better than trying to screenshot it. And in some ways, it's actually faster because we're just using OBS. That's actually what I use for my
Yeah.
entire YouTube channel. OBS, hit record, throw in, trim out the silence real quick, and done. There's an edit. It doesn't have to be super long. It might be just a little 5-minute video, but those are the things that can be very helpful to your especially level 1 tech, so they don't have to roll things up to like, hey, is there a process for how to do this? Hey, how do I add a new storage repository? Oh, here's a process. 5 minutes later, they're done.
That's one of those things. It's a fine line to walk. I don't want to recreate somebody else's documentation. Absolutely not. Um, unless there's the OIT way of doing things or the MMN way of doing things. At that point, yes, we create our documentation. I like to always link the sources of where the data came from. That way, if there's something in our documentation's out of date, they know what to reference back, or if there's any question, they have the source material to go back to. Um, that's something we learned recently. That's not even that wasn't even we've been doing this forever, and we have been doing documentation forever. It's a constant learning thing.
Yeah.
You'll constantly iterate and find things to do. I strongly recommend Empath. Like Tom, I have no financial interest in them, but I absolutely am a supporter of Kyle, Wes, and Alex and what they've built with Empath.
Yeah.
I
There's
strongly
not a lot
recommend
to
go check
compare
it
them
out.
to because it's such a
It's
niche.
not.
And
Yeah.
it's a hard sell because the MSPs, there's just not a discussion as much as there should be, I think, for all of Red RMSP. They'll argue about Kaseya, ConnectWise, who's the best RMM flavor
Mhm.
of the day, what tool sucks the least. But
Yeah.
training their staff is a huge piece of it. And training is niche. I mean, you,
Yeah.
you can't just grab someone who's been a sysadmin for a long time, drop them in MSP space. You're like, what?
No,
In my
they'll be
friends in
lost.
corporate, look at the
Yeah,
tools. Like, where do these weird tools come from? There's an entire conference of these
yeah.
tools. I've never heard of them. How big is that
Well,
company?
that's the weird thing. Coming from the enterprise space, when I got into the MSP space, nothing is the same. It's funny because we see now vendors come into the MSP space and they're vendors that were in the enterprise space, and they're like, "Oh, there's a new market. Let's get in." And almost always they failed miserably because it's such a different niche. Uh,
They don't understand multi-tenancy is the first problem.
no,
Why
multi-tenancy,
would you need
consumption
that?
billing, month to month. No. This is totally weird. You're not going to pay 3 years in advance. No, what?
Right.
Um, yeah, and that's a real thing for anybody that's come from enterprise knows damn well that's a real thing, or anybody that deals with some really larger clients. We had some FDA clients. We had some really big fintech firms in the MSP days, um, and yeah, they had their own way of doing things. But the tools they used were, I think Bloomberg was one of those. It was like 5-year contract or 10-year contract, some insanity. Um, but yeah, that's the way they work. So um, MSP isn't so bad after all. You know what I mean?
Well, what we learned from the snowflake breach with all these big companies not
Oh
having
yeah.
MFA, we learned that the enterprise space is just a bigger budget of a dumpster fire.
I'm sorry. LastPass takes the cake in my opinion. What was it? Was it LastPass or was it SolarWinds that had the intern with what was it, a Plex server? Um
That was LastPass, but you clearly didn't read the mandate report of how they got all the passwords out
no.
for Snowflake. It was pirated software and games loaded on laptops.
Oh my god.
So it was
Oh,
basically the LastPass incident. They didn't call out
yeah,
which vendors, but I noticed that
yeah.
Cylance announced their breach. But Cylance just said, "Look, the data got leaked. So were you a Snowflake user? We're not saying," is what their answer was. But someone pointed out that Cylance.snowflake.com is a thing. They have a portal. So what it is these
Yeah.
companies. Once Mandiant dropped it, going, look, we found pirated software and games on computers. That's how the info stealers all got here. They're like, oh yeah, that's kind of a lack of security controls. First, no 2FA, then info stealer slap in the face with pirated software. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
none of these companies got named, but we all know who you are.
We know, and that's another thing that I just don't understand. Well, I do understand. So the MSP space is MSP. Every MSP I've ever talked to values transparency from the vendors. I would even argue you should expect transparency from a vendor, um, but in the enterprise space, it's very much keep your secrets to yourself. I remember Amy Lucia when she came for her stint as CMO over ConnectWise. She came from the corporate space. She worked at Microsoft. She worked at major organizations. Um, And one of the and I'm not saying anything that she hasn't mentioned publicly, so it's not speaking out of turn. And she was an absolute gem at ConnectWise. I miss her dearly. But one of the things her and I discussed many times was when ConnectWise screws up, what to be public about, what to be transparent about. And I'm like, just embrace the suck, just do it. And she would mention, like, in her corporate days, you couldn't do that. That was taboo. You say as minimal as possible, which is why when Cloudflare or Mandiant or these companies are super transparent, I appreciate the hell out of it.
Oh yeah.
Because that's how we learn, right? How many times have you read one of these things? You're like, I don't do that, but I also didn't think about that. Like,
Well, exactly. And this comes down to you can even go back to the 3CX breach.
oh
We
yeah,
had someone loading and trading software with an expired certificate that had a backdoor embedded it that led to the compromise of the build server at 3CX and was it
yeah,
last year at that
yeah.
incident. Each one of these you can find a control problem. Okta, someone was able to log into their browser with their personal Gmail, sync that browser, get their password popped, and pull their Okta business credentials out of a synced browser. And you're just like, we have tools in the MSP space that can stop that from happening. Matter of fact, we
Well,
use those tools to stop people
we
from
do.
logging in. We have access control policies that don't let them just do whatever they want in their browser. And here's a company, Okta, has it.
So,
And,
so let me
and
ask you a question. In the enterprise space, obviously, that's not what occurred here, but in the enterprise space, it is very, very, very common to have work devices separate from personal devices. Um, the number of times I couldn't get on a Zoom call with somebody because they don't use Zoom and they have Zoom locked down. It's that kind of thing. CompTIA, I think I'm allowed to say this. CompTIA has an internal directive from their IT. They're not allowed to use QR codes anywhere. I personally don't think QR codes are insecure. They show the URL. That's the part that you need to be aware of. But regardless of that, corporate has very strict IT policies. And there's a lot of tools nowadays. Android, you can do this. I believe iPhone, you might be able to do this, where you can have a completely separate business profile, work profile from home profile, and none of the apps interact, none of the data interacts. They are absolute silos on the phone. Why don't we see this on desktop? I believe Linux, some of the Linux desktop versions, you can do this, right?
you could, it's just no one does because it's the inconvenience of booting back and forth
Super.
between them. And
Yep.
almost all the time, the exceptions are if you were to go through the people that work at LastPass, I bet everybody in accounting is 100% locked down. I bet
Yeah.
everyone in sales and marketing, they got a sandbox. They got the sales team in. You know what I mean? You're
Right.
like those guys will
Yeah.
click anything. They don't have
Right.
access. But then you have that one rock star dev, as they love to call them, and they're like, man, this guy's so good. We just
Yeah.
give them
He's
access to
fine.
everything, make them happy, keep them
Don't
happy.
hold him
Let's just
back. Give him whatever
remove
he
those
wants.
restrictions.
Yeah.
We used to do some of these hacking talks here in Detroit, and we knew some of the people that work for a rather large company. You might have heard of StockX before, the big trading company.
Yep.
You might have heard about their security incident a few years ago. I knew it was going to happen, and my advice for the people was basically, if you can't fix this, bail. But essentially, they had a really good security controls, with the exception of a group of developers who were the core people from day one, because they were still the founders that were
Yeah.
still there writing the code, and they did not have to obey security policies or rules.
Wow.
And it just eventually it hit them where
Yeah.
those guys were the result of, because they had way more access than they needed. It was like this core, but they were the people that wrote the software originally, and the company blew up to be $1 billion company.
And that
Um,
happens. And that
yeah,
that goes back to our initial discussion, microservices versus monolithic. It's not that it's a disqualifier. It's that if you're monolithic, you will eventually have to do the lift to go to
yeah,
microservices. It's not an option. You're going to have to, because there's a scaling problem. You can't scale globally. You can't scale resource wise. There's a limit to what you can do in a monolithic build.
yep.
So yeah,
And to give LastPass credit, they said that only 4 computers had the ability to access that. 4. But one of them
this
was what
was
had
one of them.
Flex on it.
Okay, but you know what this is? This is the picking and choosing where you apply security, which
Yes.
is bad
Yeah.
all the time. I've talked about Kevin Dukevich when he joined our team and took over the CTO role. He removed my admin accounts, and I'm like, no, I have separate admin logins. Obviously, I have my break class stuff, but the truth of the matter is, like, originally, because we grew from the ground up, and I was the principal engineer for many, many, many years. And so, like, I was talking to Marissa, my daughter, and the two of us look at each other. We're like saying privately, "This sucks." Like, now I have to log in as an admin separately, because I'll be honest, I wasn't doing it. Um, and he locked all this down, appropriately locked this stuff down as he should have. Um, but it's inconvenient. it sucks, and it's something you just got to live with. And the truth of the matter is, I haven't needed my admin credentials once. So, it's an important thing to. It's something that sucks, but it's part of the growing process. You can't have access to everything as you grow. So I
Yeah.
don't know. We're at the top of the hour. We got 10 minutes left. I think we did enough coverage. It's always fun, and you and I will go 3, 4, 5 hours if left to our own
Oh yeah,
devices.
yeah, yeah.
But I have a lunch date with my daughter Marissa, and her girlfriend came down from Orlando for Father's Day weekend, so we're gonna go out to lunch in a little bit. So
I might
Tom,
have one more quick fire question for
yeah,
you
please,
here.
dude, what's up?
Because I'm noodling around this and talking to my security friends. So I'll start here because this is a good debate. I think people should
Hmm.
really comment on this one here. I think we're at a point where you can't just evaluate the security software. It just comes up a lot in there. If you're looking at Sentinel-1, CrowdStrike,
Yeah,
Huntress, and numerous others, how can you even evaluate them? Because there's so much based on behavior analysis today. Because it comes up a lot in my channel, like, "Hey Tom, can you do like the showdown?" And I'm like, "Boy, the
how do you
showdown's not so easy because if they catch, you can't grab anything off like VX Underground or any of the
right?
sites because all the good people
They all
know
catch
about
it.
the good sites."
Yeah. Well, and I don't like, I'm sure you'll echo this. There's enough times where one tool doesn't catch it, the other one does, which is the whole point of layering. Okay, I don't want to say there's any vendor that says just use our tool and you're secure, because we've seen some of the bad marketing. But the vendors I trust, Huntress chief among them, the vendors, and I know you have close relationships with a lot of the security vendors in the space. Um, but the vendors I generally trust are the ones that are like transparent. Don't just use us, right? Like the funny, when we talk to our Huntress friends, it's almost a running meme: Sentinel-1 versus Huntress, and it's like, you don't have to. It's not either or. You can do both. It's going to take some work, but you can do both. One of the things I liked about
You read the comments.
yeah, Jonathan, you're going to get me in trouble, my friend. I actually do have an interview with their chief marketing officer, Mike Sanders, I believe later next week, to talk exactly about Kaseya 365. And believe it or not, I'm actually pro Kaseya 365, but we'll leave that for another time. But the vendors I trust, like, one of the reasons, don't give me shit, but one of the reasons when I was an MSP, I did use WebRoot for a very long time, is because you could add it on top of anything until it crashed your Windows servers, and then, shit went sideways. But besides that, it worked on top of everything. And you never expected, there was stuff WebRoot caught, Huntress didn't catch. There was stuff Huntress caught that some of my other stuff didn't catch. You just need layers. There is no just do one. Do you have any security? Do you have any endpoints anywhere on the planet that only have one security solution in the entire stream of like end to endpoint?
Eh, no, that's a challenge. I mean,
Yeah.
I see these debates come up a lot, and there's two sides to it. First is going to be, I think that they're all on a very, like you said, very equal to each other. The other side, that where I have a little more confidence than maybe some companies over the other, is I know who works there. And I mean, I don't mean like the
Yeah.
CEO. I'm talking about like the
The
real
people
people that
doing the
do the
work.
work.
Yeah. The real people. The Ashley Coopers, not the Kelvin
Yeah, the Ashley
Telmarks. Yeah.
Coopers, the people, yeah. But when you take cybersecurity, is one of those things where I look at the company and go, all right, I know the threat engineer. By the way, they're presenting at Black Hat. They're presenting it there. Oh
Yeah.
wait, they've got like 5 or 6 employees that are all presenting at these big conferences, or you'll find them at a B side. In some of those companies, it's actually how I've chose some companies, is because I'll see someone leave and I'm like, yo, where you headed? Because I know you work only at cool places. Like I've sent that message to friends, and because I know that type of mindset that they have in a company that
Yeah.
appreciates hiring someone like that, you're like, yeah, they're the people that are going to be able to look at threat intelligence, understand it. They participate in the community heavily, but that's not an easy way to judge or score any type of security product. But it's just kind of an interesting nuance I was kind of thinking about, because I seen the debate came up in Reddit RMSP, like it does about once a week. And so
Well,
it's so hard to evaluate them now. It's
well,
the game has changed. Static analysis is old school. Everybody's got that. It's all about, the nuance of behavior and what behavior denotes a problem. And if they only look at behaviors, and for example, we have someone who writes some custom code at one of our clients, that behavior would be flagged by some of the products a lot.
well,
So
and that's
yeah,
what's so important, right? At this point, EDR, SIMSOC, those are the locks. Well, EDR is your locks on your door. It's nice to have. It's something you would never install a front door or an exterior door without a lock on it. But it's not the only thing like there's a million other ways to get into the house. That, I know that, everybody else knows that. Behavior analysis is definitely important. If I come home at 6 o'clock every day and suddenly the front door opens at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and none of the cars are here, that's an odd behavior. And there's ways to track this, right? Impossible travel is one of the easiest ones to track. And for those looking at the people in the chat, there's nobody here that doesn't know impossible travel, but we usually get a couple hundred views after the fact. But impossible travel is when you're normally a United States user, for example, and you see a login from Paris. Like, what the hell happened? Just sad to say it, but Azure doesn't log that by default. You have to turn on auditing. You have to turn on security. It's insane to me. Why is P2 a paid thing? Like, that is mind-boggling to me. Simon loves to go to EDR Fest, electric dance rave. Yeah, that's the same thing. It's
EDM, EDR. It's all good.
It's all the same. Glow sticks and milk. But you're talking about the people, looking at the people that go and move off to do great things. That's the part that kind of killed me about LastPass, because anybody that's been around long enough, the original founders of LastPass were super transparent about security.
Yep.
They actually went with Steve Gibson and went into a deep dive, and he talked about it, of how impressed he was. So to see their fall from that, I'll be honest, if Cloudflare ever falls, it's going to break my heart. Like, they do a lot of they do some wrong things, but they do a lot of really right things.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. You know what? And we'll leave that as a conversation topic for the MMN Discord. We're both on there. Josh is one of the.
Tell me I'm wrong about that, because I haven't found anyone to prove me wrong. I want to be proven wrong. I don't want to be right. I want to actually do the video.
I don't think you're wrong at all. I think it's and that's the challenge, right? So I think it's going to be less about what we're proactively trying to. It's going to be less about proactively trying to block specific actions and more learning what to expect. It's no different than an MSP walks into a client. Just onboarding is figuring out what they do, how they do it, and looking at the process to improve. Well, security has hit that mark, and I think it's a valuable thing. Or tell us we're both wrong and go to the Discord and tell us we're idiots, which we've been called before by our wives. Tom, you're a dad. I'm a dad. I want to say Happy Father's Day in advance, my friend. To any fathers watching, Happy Father's Day. And we hope you have a great weekend and no security events this weekend. Enjoy yourselves. Until next time, everybody, take care of yourselves and each other.
All right. Take care.
This has been a broadcast of the MSP Media Network.